friends and spiritual seekers. So this is another episode of Makeup and Magic, and in this video we're going to be talking about witchcraft and sexuality. What did they think about it? Is there any rules? Is there anything that's preached about what you can and can't do as far as sexual activities? Obviously a disclaimer that this is going to be more of an 18+ video. I'm just going to be using frank terms, so it's not going to be anything like too graphic, but again, very 18+ themes. Just a disclaimer on that. So my camera just crapped out on me, so the first part that I recorded is completely missing. I don't know what happened, but I just put my foundation on and a little bit of concealer, so I haven't done any of the good stuff yet. So in this video, we're going to be talking about witchcraft and how it relates into sexuality as well. I'm not going to talk about gender too much, as there's not a lot of historical stuff talking about gender other than using the energies of masculine and feminine and gaining a balance, and obviously portraying yourself in a balance of feminine and masculine power. That's how you kind of have a well-rounded power and control. As far as outward expression of gender and being kind of fluid in your gender expression, it's a very modern thing of people being allowed, or at least openly doing that. Not saying that there hasn't been historical evidence of people doing that in the past, just in related to witchcraft, I couldn't find any solid evidence or anecdotal evidence or anything like that. So I don't want to talk about it too much because I really don't know and I couldn't find any research about it. So I'm just going to leave it more into a sexuality discussion versus a gender discussion. So as far as sexuality and religion, I don't think you need me to tell you what our modern religions, or at least as more prominent religions, believe or preach about sexuality or sexual preference or anything like that. You don't need me to tell you. So just keeping that in the back of your mind, because a lot of the dark times in witchcraft history is related to those religions becoming more prominent and spreading their influence across the land. So throughout history, not only in pagan times, but just in general ancient societies, historical societies, sex was seen as a point of pleasure. It was something to do for fun. It was pleasurable. You can kind of do it with anybody, and it was just something to enjoy. Obviously, it has the functionality of creating children, and people would have wives, husbands, partners, whatever they were called in those areas, to have and bear children. But the act of sex was seen as an act of pleasure. There are many historical documents and anecdotal evidence that ancient Greece and in ancient Rome, even in Egypt, that there would be public orgies that would have same-sex, intersex, whatever sex, and it was completely accepted. It was a public event. Yeah, obviously royalty would have their kind of big special orgy parties, but the regular folk would have their parties as well. I read somewhere that one of the reasons that Christianity was promoting heterosex only was because to promote childbearing, because if you can't convert enough Christians, you can just make some Christians. If you can't convert them, you make them. So as Christianity was starting to sweep across the land, people were already kind of getting used to the idea of monogamous relationships, heterosexual relationships only. So fast forward to the witch trials. Now, in the peak of the witch trial time, this was in the 1500s and 1600s, this was happening in Europe. It started in Europe, and as settlers started moving over into North America, obviously they took that tradition with them. One thing you don't see a lot about is that the witchcraft trials were very sex motivated and very sex dominated. Now, there's no secret that the majority of people who suffered and were prosecuted due to the witchcraft trials/law was women. One weird thing about that is the majority of them were women who were over 50 and widowed. Now, over 50 is not old in modern times, but in the 1500s, 50 was old, old. You gotta remember, everybody died of everything back then. Historians can't really agree on why older women were targeted by this. One article that I read theorized that one of the reasons is that subconsciously these older widowed women were seen as disposable. They could no longer bear children. Obviously, that was the only thing women were good for back then. And also they were widowed, so they didn't have a husband that they were taking care of that obviously couldn't live without her, or other family members that would fight against their prosecution. So essentially they were easy targets. One thing they used to use in the trials to prove that somebody was a witch was look for a witch's mark. And it actually looks like geographically that witch's mark changed. So depending on the town or the area, what a witch's mark changed. So obviously they were the right ones. But more prominently in England, one of the things they used to use for a witch's mark was look for a teat that proved that the devil or demons were sucking at her teats, and that obviously proved that she was being controlled by said devil/demons. As you can imagine, this put a lot of fear in people's minds in regards to expressing their sexuality and absolutely not wanting to be seen as a sexual being, because it was considered like midwives or people who did a lot with gynecological work or tried to help women with their women's issues, obsessed with genitals, and that obviously had to do with them being, you know, concubining with the devil. So one of the reasons witchcraft trials even took place was obviously to gain control, keep control in the hand of heterosexual men. Surprise, surprise. So one of the questions historians keep asking themselves is, why was their control threatened? Why did they feel like it was so threatened that they needed to accuse women of witchcraft and hang them, drown them, etc.? One theory is that that time, this is when there was a lot of expansion as far as industry, people were traveling more, like as far as men were exploring more, so women were starting to have more responsibility as far as not only keeping household or, you know, keep bearing children and that kind of stuff, but they actually had to do a lot more what would be considered men's roles just because there weren't any around or there wasn't enough around. So one theory is that they needed to make sure that women didn't get any kind of crazy ideas, like they could do that on their own, you know. Fast forward to the 1900s, I know that's quite a bit of jump, but that really is a big jump. This is when neo-paganism and Wicca and other more spiritual movements were starting to happen. One of the reasons this kind of spiritual growth really happened and kind of really blew up in the 1900s is, one, because of feminism, women were starting to not only demand more rights, but were actually getting some, but also sexual frustration and oppression was starting to, you know, really affect people. So they were starting to push back against the church. This is where the interesting part really starts to come in, because in most spiritual practices, open practices at least, there are really no rules on your spirituality. The only hard rules that I can find and agree with is, obviously you need to be an adult, 2 consenting adults, doing whatever, as long as you're not causing harm or trauma to a person viciously and unconsensually, you're good to go. Good to go. There are no hard rules on how many partners you can have, how many partners you can have at one time, or what gender those partners are. And like I said earlier, when I was doing my research, there was no really reference to gender outside of doing spiritual practices and tapping into the divine feminine, the divine masculine, finding balance in both. But as far as how you would translate that into outward expression, I couldn't really find anything about it, which I kind of like, because if I couldn't find anything about it, that means there isn't anybody trying to preach any rules about it. When I was trying to do research for this video, the number one thing that kept popping up was sex magic or sexual magic, which is definitely a thing that you can do. And there's lots of writings and articles about it. But one thing that I found weird is that most of those articles, and I didn't obviously look at all of them, but the top searches that came up on Google when I searched it, all of them say you and your partner or yourself. You can obviously do sex magic by yourself, but there's none specific for, you know, homosexual relationships, intersex relationships, anything like that. Which the reason I find it weird is because in a time that is very prominent online, especially in social media, that like everyone wants their representation, everyone wants to be special and have their little spotlight of them and specifically what they want and how they express themselves, etc. So I just found it weird that there was no articles about any specific type of relationship, just you and your partner, which I found really weird. Another thing that I find really weird, and so there's no solid research on this. This is totally just me speaking out of anecdotal evidence and my personal opinion, but there are no solid research or articles or writings specifically on how open and accepting witchcraft is in general to different sexual preferences. Because I find it very obvious interacting with the community online, and this is talking about people who in witchcraft of all different backgrounds, all different practices, but one thing that you kind of see over and over again, especially from elders or experienced witches or whatever you want to call us, we are all quite open with our sexuality. And that's part of your practice, is just being very open about yourself and being honest about yourself and accepting yourself as a whole. And sexuality obviously has a part in that. But I just find it weird that it's not more promoted on how open and accepting witchcraft is of different sexual preferences, or what people consider, alternative sexual preferences. Because I feel like young people who are struggling with their sexuality and maybe trying to find a place to belong, and they're not only dealing with that kind of stuff in their life, but they're also trying to find, spiritual balance or spiritual health. And it's just, why isn't it promoted? Why are we not promoting it more? I hope I'm doing that at least a little bit with this video of, if you're searching and you're trying to find your clan, your spiritual clan, but you feel like you're blocked or you're limited because of your sexual preferences or your gender for that matter, hello, we're all over here, and we're not only very accepting, but a good majority of the people in this craft do have alternative sexuality. And at the end of the day, that's one thing we really, really don't care about. As long as you're behaving morally and ethically, again, consent to adults, etc., really don't care. Also, speaking historically, sex has been integrated into rituals, rites of passage, different rites and things like that in different witchcraft practices for a long time, especially in the more modern times, when you think of the early 1900s, when the occult really started getting popular in Western society. So using sex as a tool of magic is far from new. Obviously, there's been some bad apples throughout the years, different clan leaders or high priests or high priestess obviously taking advantage of that and not behaving the best with people as far as their personal space and sexual interactions. But for the general, it's been used in a very respectful and powerful way. And if you ask me, I think as a community, it's something we need to bring back more of, because I feel like we've kind of slipped backwards a little bit. I feel like the modern, what the heck is going on with that? I'm just gonna use my fingers because I don't know what the heck's going on with that little brush. But I feel like we've kind of slipped back into modern society's kind of definition of relationships, sexual interactions, what's acceptable, etc. I feel like we've kind of slipped back a little bit. Part of that is because of social media and cancel culture and all of that kind of stuff. You need to be really careful about what you do. Obviously, in 2021, it wouldn't be the best idea just due to safety, but I think it's definitely something that we could work towards in the future as a community. Another interesting thing about sexuality and the rules in witchcraft is there's no hard rules about monogamy. Which is another interesting factor, because there are a lot of people as well in witchcraft who have their partners, so they're either legally married or not, but they've kind of done some kind of commitment to their partner, but they don't necessarily follow monogamy. There's no belief that the only way for me to prove my love and my commitment to you is to only have sexual interactions with you and you only, and you can only have sexual interactions with me. Which is definitely another popular religion belief and regime that they've obviously promoted throughout the years. And we've obviously just adapted it into our modern society. That's considered normal. That's considered what you're supposed to do. No matter what your religious affiliation is or sexuality or anything like that, one thing that's very prominent in Western society is that you're supposed to be monogamous. And if you look at the statistics of divorces that end because of infidelity, it's a crock of shit. And even though we all know deep down that it's a crock of shit, we still hold each other to that standard. We all need to let our shadows out and realize it's a way of controlling us, and we need to kind of get over that. The reality is that your sexuality has nothing really to do with your spirituality. Whatever spiritual path you decide to follow shouldn't dictate anything you do with your genitals. And I mean, we can get into a bunch of controversial debates, but we're not doing that today. Also, I believe that having a well-rounded and strong belief and having a strong understanding of who you are as a sexual being is very important to you, just understanding who you are as a person. Sex is a big part of life, as much as people like to think it's not. And if you're not fully accepting of yourself or allowing yourself to enjoy yourself as a sexual being to your full potential, then you're just limiting yourself. You're not limiting anybody else. And even if you're a person who preaches to other people how they should act and how they should express themselves sexually, you're also not limiting them. You're affecting them negatively as far as self-identification, as self-worth, etc. But you're still limiting yourself. Preaching to another person, they might do what you want them to do, but more than likely, more often than not, eventually they're gonna hate you and resent you enough to do what they wanted to do all along. Since my hair is looking super quarantine rough right now, until next week, decided to put a wig on today. Sex and gender is always a hot topic. It gets people riled up no matter where you fall on the fence or your own beliefs. It is always going to rile people up. My question to you is, if you're being affected by anything that I've said in this video, which has been very, very tame considered to some other stuff that's online or what other people preach in real life, why are you being triggered? If you're being triggered, that's your shadow showing. So there's obviously something going on in your subconscious of why this is triggering you. So instead of focusing on the imaginary fault in me that you perceive that I have, what fault do you have that you are trying to hide or oppress that is making you lash out? Because I'm assuming there's a part of yourself that you're denying, and that's why you get triggered about these types of discussions. Oh my god, why do I have to struggle with lashes so much? So touching upon the subject of sex magic, the main premise is using the energy of your sexual interactions, whether it is by yourself or with a partner. Obviously it's more stronger if you have a partner because you're using your combined energy to do the magic, but it's basically about using that energy to produce an outcome or use it for like a manifestation. That's the most common, especially if you're trying to manifest something together, some kind of common goal. And there's really no limits on what you can do with your sex magic. But if you're doing it with a partner, obviously if you guys are working together on the same goal, it's obviously going to be a lot stronger than the two of you trying to do your own thing with the energy that's moving back and forth, because it's just going to contradict each other. These lashes are ridiculous and I love them. Just going to try to fill in some gaps with eyeliner. There is no way for me to do this right-handed without making a freaking mess. Pretty much the long story short of this video is, if there's any time you're questioning, oh, this is what I'm feeling as far as my sexuality or even gender for that matter, I don't know if this is accepting of witchcraft, I don't know if they believe in this, etc. Long story short, the answer is yes. Full stop. The answer is always going to be yes. Your sexuality should never be something that you feel is holding you back from your craft or exploring your craft, growing your craft, etc. It should be the very last thing you think of. It shouldn't be a factor at all. And if it is, then you're looking up to the wrong people. That being said, there might be some closed practices that think and preach differently. That is going to be specific to that practice, to that group. So if you're training or learning from a closed group and that's what they're preaching and that's what they're saying, that is specific to those people and that group. That does not characterize witchcraft in general at all. I've got to try to make this cheap wig look decent. One thing I want to finish off this video with is just saying to let your freak flag fly. No matter what colors or designs that you identify with or what your flag looks like, let it fly, let it be yourself. There's nobody in this community that is going to judge you on it, let alone prosecute you on it. And if they are, because they are not true spiritual beings that are whole to themselves, And that's an issue. That is their thing. Do not get dragged into their bullshit. Find your own spiritual wealth and spiritual self. And that includes embracing your sexuality and who you are as a sexual being, no matter what your gender is. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned at least one thing. My next video in this kind of format is actually going to be about integrating magic into your skincare routine. It doesn't really involve makeup other than me taking off my makeup. Have a good day, guys. Mwah.